If you are watching this video, you've probably experienced something that few dare to admit: the profound exhaustion that comes after months or years dedicated to self-knowledge. Perhaps you've done therapy, meditated daily, read dozens of books on spirituality, worked on your shadow, and now you feel more lost than when you began. You are not alone, and more importantly, you are not crazy. Carl Jung, the pioneer of depth psychology, spent decades studying a phenomenon he called the dark night of the individual's soul. Today, we'll explore the dark side of self-knowledge that is rarely discussed, but affects millions of people on their personal growth journeys. If you recognized your own journey in these words, perhaps this is the moment to follow us more closely. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It will help us a lot. Now let's move forward. Mary was 42 years old when she decided it was time to work on her issues. Daughter of narcissistic parents, survivor of a toxic marriage, she dove headfirst into therapy, shadow work, mindfulness meditation. For 2 years, she religiously dedicated herself to self-knowledge. The result? A depression deeper than anything she had experienced before. What Mary didn't know is that she had fallen into what Jung called the paradox of expanded consciousness. The more conscious we become of our patterns, traumas, and defense mechanisms, the more vulnerable we become to suffering that was previously unconscious. Recent research from Harvard University shows that when we increase our self-awareness, we literally alter the activity of the prefrontal cortex. This brain region, responsible for self-evaluation, becomes hyperactive. The result is a phenomenon that neuroscientists call a rumination loop, a vicious cycle of self-analysis that can lead to what appears to be iatrogenic depression, caused by the treatment itself. Jung observed this in his own journey. Between 1913 and 1917, he went through what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. During these years, even being one of the most respected psychiatrists of his time, he experienced hallucinations, psychotic episodes, and deep depression. Later, he would write, "The privilege of life is to be who you are. But the price of this privilege is knowing who you really are." There is a psychological phenomenon known as the Cassandra effect, based on the mythological figure who could see the future but was condemned to never be believed. In the context of self-knowledge, this manifests when we begin to see dysfunctional patterns everywhere. In our family, in our relationships, in society. You begin to notice how your mother projects her own frustrations onto you. You notice how your partner uses primitive defense mechanisms. You see how your friends repeat the same destructive patterns indefinitely. This clarity, which should be liberating, often becomes an isolating burden. Jung described this as the loneliness of the conscious individual. In his own words, the individual human being has always been and always will be a minority. The majority, the collective mass, does not reach the level of personal experience, but remains trapped in unconscious identifications. Why suffering seems to increase? When you had no awareness of your patterns, they functioned as natural anesthetics. Your psychological defenses, denial, projection, rationalization, protected you from deep emotional pain. Inner work removes these anesthetics without offering immediate substitutes. It's like performing emotional surgery without adequate anesthesia. You are technically healthier, but the pain is excruciating. Jung called this necessary suffering, an inevitable phase of the individuation process that is rarely adequately explained to those who embark on the journey of self-knowledge. Richard was an engineer, pragmatic by nature. At 48, after a painful divorce, he discovered inner work. Within 6 months, he was immersed in family constellation workshops, ayahuasca retreats, and transpersonal therapy sessions. He felt awake for the first time in his life. The problem was that he also felt superior to everyone around him. Jung warned about a specific phenomenon he called psychic inflation, when the ego identifies with archetypal contents or transcendent experiences. In simple terms, when you confuse having profound insights with being a profound person. Studies from Stanford University reveal that mystical or awakening experiences activate the brain's reward system in a way similar to addictive substances. The release of dopamine and endorphins creates not only well-being, but also a sense of specialness that can be deeply addictive. When someone has a transcendent experience, whether through meditation, therapy, or psychedelic substances, The brain registers this as a significant achievement. The ego, always eager for validation, appropriates this experience and builds a new identity around it. I am an awakened person. I see the truth that others don't see. The signs of spiritual inflation. Jung identified several characteristic signs of psychic inflation in the spiritual context. Grandiose language. The person begins to use terms like awakening, higher consciousness, elevated vibration, as if they were permanent states they had achieved. Subtle judgment develops a refined ability to catalog others as unconscious, asleep, or stuck in low patterns. Resistance to feedback. Any criticism is interpreted as coming from people who don't understand the spiritual path. Progressive isolation. Gradually distances from relationships that don't validate their new spiritual identity. Jung experienced this firsthand. During his period of confrontation with the unconscious, he developed a complex relationship with archetypal figures that emerged in his visions. At times, he completely identified with them, feeling like a messiah or prophet. Later, he would write about how he needed to develop what he called the transcendent function, the ability to maintain a conscious relationship with unconscious contents without being possessed by them. What makes spiritual inflation particularly insidious is that it often masks unhealed wounds. The identity of an awakened person can function as a sophisticated defense against feelings of inadequacy, abandonment, or insignificance. A person who feels deeply hurt by rejection may develop a spiritual identity that places them above the need for external approval. Someone who has always felt different or excluded may find in spirituality a way to transform their pain into superiority. Jung observed that inflation is always a loss of reality and adaptation, since it presupposes the existence of a personality superior to the human average. In social media and modern spiritual communities, psychic inflation finds fertile ground. People share mystical experiences, profound insights, and transformations as if they were trophies. This creates a culture of spiritual comparison, where personal value is measured by how conscious or awakened someone appears to be. The irony is that the more someone proclaims their spiritual evolution, the more they demonstrate that they are still trapped in the same ego dynamics that characterize unworked consciousness. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Anne was 35 when she began her journey of self-knowledge after the sudden death of her father. For 3 years, she intensely dedicated herself to therapy, meditation, and spiritual studies. Gradually, she began to see through patterns that previously gave structure to her life. The need for others' approval, the search for financial security, the belief that romantic relationships would bring completeness. The problem was that, in seeing through these illusions, Anne found herself in a deep existential void. Without the old motivators, approval, success, romance, she no longer knew what to live for. It was as if she had awakened from a dream and discovered that reality was a desert. Jung called this the loss of structuring illusions, a stage where old motivations die, but new ones have not yet been born. It's a psychological no man's land that can last months or years. Research from the University of Michigan shows that when we question fundamental beliefs about purpose and meaning, specific brain regions related to motivation, such as the nucleus accumbens, show decreased activity. It's literally as if the brain loses its ability to generate enthusiasm for life. This phenomenon is exacerbated by what neuroscientists call an extinction burst, when behaviors that were previously rewarding lose their ability to generate dopamine. The person finds themselves in a state of anhedonia, unable to feel pleasure or motivation for activities that were previously meaningful. Jung described this period as necessary for what he called the individuation process. In his words, "There is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. Life requires for its completion not just the good, but also the bad. It is made not just of yes, but also of no." But this perspective, although intellectually comforting, offers little consolation for those experiencing the void. It's like telling someone who is drowning that water is necessary for life. Technically true, but not immediately helpful. Jung himself went through this period during his confrontation with the unconscious. For years, he questioned not only his career and relationships, but the very validity of human existence. In his personal diary he wrote, My soul was dead, and I didn't know how to resurrect it. A common trap at this stage is what we might call pseudo-authenticity. The belief that, to be authentic, you must reject everything that society values. This can lead to extreme decisions, abandoning stable careers, ending functional relationships, rejecting any form of structure or responsibility. Jung observed that this is a natural, but temporary phase of individuation. The danger lies in permanently establishing oneself in this state of rebellion against social norms, confusing destructiveness with authenticity. The difference between pathological emptiness and creative emptiness. It is crucial to distinguish between existential emptiness as a symptom of depression and emptiness as a creative space necessary for psychological rebirth. Jung saw the second type as fertile, a psychological womb where a new personality could form. Pathological emptiness is characterized by hopelessness, paralysis, and destructive ideation. Creative emptiness, although painful, maintains a quality of expectancy, a subtle sense that something new is about to emerge. Psychologist Marie-Louise von France, one of Jung's principal disciples, described this as the difference between a dead desert and a plowed field. Both are empty, but one has potential for new life. Signs of transition. Jung identified several signs that someone is transitioning from destructive emptiness to creative emptiness. Symbolic dreams. The unconscious begins to produce images of renewal. Births, springs, germinating seeds. Emerging curiosity. A subtle curiosity about future possibilities, even if not yet specific. Tolerance for uncertainty. A growing capacity to be comfortable with not knowing, without despair. Compassion for others. An empathic understanding that others also struggle, reducing isolation. Mark discovered his life mission at 44, after a severe depression that led him to years of therapy. Feeling transformed by the experience, he decided to become a life coach, family constellation facilitator, and organizer of healing circles. In 2 years, he was completely dedicated to helping others to heal themselves. The problem was that Mark had substituted one compulsion for another. Instead of facing the deeper layers of his own wounds, he had found a socially acceptable way to avoid them, obsessively focusing on other people's problems. Jung called this furor sanandi, a compulsion to heal that often hides an inability to tolerate one's own pain. It's one of the most subtle and socially rewarded shadows of the personal development world. Studies from Emory University reveal that caregiving behaviors activate the same neural circuits associated with addiction. When someone helps others, the brain releases oxytocin and dopamine, creating a sense of purpose and connection that can be deeply addictive. For the wounded healer, helping others is not just an altruistic choice, it's a neurobiological necessity. Without the regular fix of feeling needed and useful, this person experiences something similar to withdrawal syndrome, anxiety, emptiness, and a sense of lack of purpose. Jung observed that when someone cannot save themselves, they often project this need onto others. The person unconsciously chooses to help people with problems similar to their own, in the unconscious hope that by healing the other, they heal themselves by proxy. This explains why so many therapists, coaches, and facilitators end up attracting clients with exactly the same patterns they themselves haven't resolved. It's a sophisticated form of compulsive repetition, reliving one's own trauma through others, hoping to finally master it. The signs of the healer's shadow. Jung identified several indicators that someone is using the healer role as an escape. Excessive identification. The person becomes emotionally entangled in the problems of their clients or friends. Need to be needed. A subtle anxiety when others begin to improve and need less help. Resistance to supervision. Avoiding personal therapy or professional supervision, rationalizing that they have already worked through their issues. Recurrent burnout. Cycles of emotional exhaustion that are attributed to giving too much to others. Unbalanced relationships. Consistently attracting dependent people or people in crisis to personal relationships. Behind the compulsion to heal others, Jung often found a deep narcissistic wound, a sense of not being valuable unless one is being useful. This wound usually originates in childhood, when the child learned that love and approval were conditional upon their ability to care for the emotional needs of adults. The adult wounded healer continues this pattern, unconsciously believing that their value as a person depends on their usefulness to others. Paradoxically, this dynamic prevents both the healer and those they help from developing true emotional autonomy. Jung distinguished between the genuine impulse to serve and the compulsion to heal. Authentic healing emerges from a place of fullness. You help because you overflow, not because you need to feel needed. Compulsive healing emerges from emptiness. You help to fill something that's missing in yourself. Authentic healing maintains healthy boundaries and encourages independence in the other. Compulsive healing creates mutual dependence and confuses love with need. Jung believed that the wounded healer needed to go through a period of therapeutic withdrawal, a deliberate time away from the helper role to rediscover who they were beyond this identity. This doesn't mean permanently abandoning the desire to serve, but rather healing the underlying compulsion. Only then can the person's true healing potential emerge, not as a neurotic need, but as a natural expression of their integrated nature. After years navigating the turbulent waters of self-knowledge, a fundamental question arises: how to live authentically without falling into the traps we've explored. Jung proposed something radical for his time: the ability to hold opposing tensions without prematurely resolving them. Helen, a 52-year-old therapist, exemplifies this mature integration. After a decade of intense inner work, including periods of spiritual inflation, existential emptiness, and the compulsion to heal, she developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity for paradoxical awareness. Helen knows she still has unintegrated shadows, but doesn't flagellate herself for it. She works to help others, but doesn't depend on this to feel valuable. She values spiritual growth, but doesn't use this to feel superior. She lives in the dynamic tension between opposites, without collapsing into either extreme. Recent research from the University of Wisconsin shows that brains of individuals who have developed what Jung called a mature personality exhibit unique patterns of neural connectivity. There is greater communication between the prefrontal cortex, rational thinking, and the limbic system, emotions, allowing for more nuanced responses to complex situations. This neural integration corresponds to what Jung described as the union of psychological opposites. It's not the elimination of the shadow, but its conscious inclusion. It's not the transcendence of emotions, but their integration with reason. The pillars of authentic integration. Based on decades studying individuals who successfully navigated the individuation process, Jung identified several characteristics of the integrated personality. Authentic humility. The person recognizes their limitations without diminishing themselves. They know that growth is infinite and that there will always be blind aspects of themselves. Discriminative compassion. Develops the ability to be empathetic without losing oneself in the other. Can help without needing to save. Paradoxical presence. Can be completely present in the moment while maintaining perspective on the transience of all experiences. Flexible purpose. Has a sense of direction in life, but is not rigidly attached to specific ways of expressing this purpose. Authentic relationships. Attracts and maintains relationships based on who they really are, not on who they think they should be. One of the techniques that Jung developed to cultivate integration was what he called divided attention, the ability to observe one's own psychological processes while experiencing them. It's a form of emotional metacognition that allows for conscious response instead of automatic reaction. For example, when anger arises, the integrated person can simultaneously feel the anger and observe how anger manifests in their body and mind. This creates space for conscious choice about how to express or work with the emotion. Signs of psychological maturation. Jung identified several markers that someone was progressing toward authentic integration. Reduction of drama. Life becomes less dramatic, not because it is less intense, but because the person doesn't unnecessarily amplify experiences. Humor about oneself. Develops the ability to laugh at one's own contradictions and absurdities without cruelty. Tolerance for uncertainty. Can make important decisions even without having all the information or guarantees. Sustainable energy. No longer oscillates between periods of spiritual mania and existential depression. Mature relationship with death. Accepts finitude as a natural part of existence, which paradoxically increases vitality. The return to the world. Perhaps the most important aspect of authentic integration is what Jung called the return to the world. After years of introspection and inner work, the mature person finds genuine ways to contribute to collective life. This doesn't mean abandoning the inner life, but integrating it with authentic external engagement. The person becomes a bridge between the deep inner world and the practical needs of everyday life. Jung saw this as the true goal of individuation, not to become an enlightened hermit, but a human being capable of living fully in both depth and surface, in both solitude and community. If you've made it this far, you've probably recognized something of your own journey in the words we've shared. The truth that Jung discovered, and that each person on the path of self-knowledge eventually faces, is that growth hurts. Not in the dramatic way that movies portray, but in a subtle, persistent way that questions everything you thought you knew about yourself and about life. But there is hope in this pain. Jung believed that conscious suffering is different from unconscious suffering. When you understand that confusion, emptiness, and even spiritual inflation are natural stages of growth, you can navigate them with more compassion for yourself. The path is not linear. You don't graduate from self-knowledge to a perfectly integrated life. Instead, you develop a more graceful dance with the complexities of being human. You learn to honor both your light and your shadow, both your wisdom and your ignorance. Remember, you are not broken because growth is difficult. You haven't failed because you still struggle with old patterns. You're not behind because others seem to have gotten there first. The journey of becoming who you really are has no finish line. It only has moments of greater clarity and periods of necessary confusion. If this video brought some clarity to your journey, consider sharing it with someone who may also be navigating these deep waters. Leave a comment telling which part resonated most with you. Your experience may help others who are going through similar challenges. Jung said that the only way out is through. May you find the courage to continue going through, knowing that you are not alone in this deeply human journey of becoming who you really are. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When we can find where, in ourselves, we find that which irritates us in the other, we no longer need to be irritated. Carl Gustav Jung.